She whispered, "I pretend to be asleep when he drinks." They ignored her, but one man, a quiet rancher with weathered hands and a gentler heart, believed her, and belief was the beginning of everything. The screen door slammed harder than it should have. Dust jumped off the floorboards. Mabel Wynne didn't flinch. She didn't dare. Her hands stayed folded neat in her lap, fingers stiff with silent prayer. Across the room, the man who bore her last name paced like a caged thing. Levi Wynne. Strong shoulders, stronger voice, and a soul hollowed out long ago by something he would never speak of, only drown. The bottle hit the wall, shattered, amber liquid bleeding down the wood. Still, Mabel didn't move. "You think I don't see it?" Levi's voice came low, dark, near a growl. "The way you look at me like I'm some kind of monster, you think that makes you better." She said nothing. She'd learned silence was safer than sense. His shadow passed over her again, heavy, looming, but he didn't touch her. Not yet. Not tonight. The house creaked as he stumbled back toward the hallway, the stink of sweat and liquor trailing behind like rot. The bedroom door slammed. A lock clicked. Only then did Mabel breathe. And even then, it was the shallow kind. Outside, the moon hung low and full over Flat Bend, Wyoming, casting long silver lines across the dry land. Coyotes howled, but they were far less dangerous than the man she shared a bed with. Mabel rose slowly, barefoot on cold floor, and made her way to the window. The barn stood dark in the distance. Horses stabled. Tools hung. Nothing out of place. Not out there, anyway. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. A bruise was forming beneath her sleeve. She didn't have to look to know. She could feel the hot bloom of it, the way her skin throbbed under cotton. The same way it always did the nights after Levi came home, too tired to be kind. Behind her, a floorboard groaned. She froze. Nothing followed, just the wind. She waited a beat longer before creeping to the small table in the corner of the kitchen. Hidden beneath a loose plank was a folded slip of paper, one line scribbled in a careful hand, the one she'd rehearsed but never dared to mail. "If you ever see the girl with the scar above her eye, believe her." She hadn't signed it. Didn't need to. There weren't many girls in Flat Bend with a half-moon scar just below the brow, courtesy of a broken coffee pot and a drunken apology. People had seen. People had known. But knowing wasn't the same as doing. Mabel put the note back, carefully, quietly. When she woke the next morning, the house smelled of dust and anger. Levi was gone, likely to town, or the saloon, or both. He always left early after nights like that, left her to scrape eggs from cold pans and pretend like nothing was bleeding inside her. But the silence of the morning held something different this time. A shift. A tremor, and it came just after noon when hooves thundered up the dirt road like a warning shot. Mabel stepped onto the porch as the rider dismounted. She knew who it was before he took off his hat. Silas Burke, rancher from the northern end of the valley, widower, quiet, kept to himself, the kind of man who nodded slow and spoke slower. Folks said he only came to town for supplies and funerals. He shouldn't have been there. Not on her porch, not that day. "Mabel," he said. She blinked. His voice was softer than she expected, almost too gentle for someone his size. He was a tall man, shoulders broad from decades of work, but there was no hardness in his eyes, only concern. "Mr. Burke," she said, forcing politeness. "I heard things." Her stomach turned. "I came to see if they were true." She didn't ask what he'd heard. Didn't need to. She turned away. "I have chores." "I'll help." "I don't need help." "I know." She paused. She was used to people not listening when she said no, but not like this. Not without pressure. Not without insistence. Silas just stood there, holding his hat in one hand, eyes steady but not invasive, not pushing, waiting. She hated how much that made her want to cry. "Levi's not here," she said finally. "I figured. Don't know when he'll be back." "I don't mind." She swallowed hard and nodded toward the barn. "There's hay to turn." He nodded once and followed her. They worked in silence, not the heavy kind, not the kind that closed in around you like Levi's did. This was lighter, room to breathe, room to think. He didn't ask questions, didn't stare, just lifted hay with quiet precision, moving like a man who didn't need to prove anything. Mabel stole glances, the way his sleeves rolled up past his forearms, the way he wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, not once complaining. She remembered him from church once, long ago, before Levi stopped letting her go. Silas had sat alone on the end of the pew, said his amens with quiet conviction. When the work was done, he didn't linger. "If you need something," he said as he mounted up, "I ride by most days near dusk." She didn't answer, just nodded. That night Levi came home drunker than usual, his eyes bloodshot, his jaw tight. He reeked of tobacco and resentment. "Someone said they saw you with Burke," he snarled, slamming the door behind him. Mabel didn't speak. "You talking to him now, is that it? Thinking he's better than me?" Her hands trembled as she dried the dishes. "You're mine, Mabel, don't forget that." She didn't. But that night when she lay in bed beside him, stiff and silent, she whispered the words only the dark could hear. "I pretend to be asleep when he drinks." And somewhere down the road, a rancher turned his horse toward the horizon and felt something stir deep in his chest. He didn't know what yet. But he would. Mabel found herself scanning the ridge every evening. Not with hope, not exactly. Hope was too fragile a thing to survive in her house, but with something close. A need, maybe. A tether. Every day since Silas Burke had ridden up her path, something inside her stirred at the sound of hooves. She hated that. Hated how much she longed to see his silhouette against the dying sun. But he didn't come again. Not for a week. And in that week, Levi's anger brewed darker, heavier. He was like a storm that never rained, only gathered in thick, churning silence, threatening to snap the sky in half with one crack of thunder. Mabel kept quiet. Her voice had long ago learned how not to rise. Still, Levi watched her differently now, suspicious, possessive. He came home earlier, drank harder, followed her with his eyes like a hunter might follow prey that no longer walked in circles. And for once Mabel was not walking in circles. Her steps had altered, slightly. She lingered longer at the barn, sat stiller on the porch. She even prayed again, not the hollow kind she used to mumble through gritted teeth, but real prayers, the kind that came from the curled edges of her soul. Prayers that someone, somewhere might see her, might remember she was human. Then one morning, just as the frost was thinning and the sun rose weakly over the hills, she opened the front door to find a bundle at her feet. A burlap sack, inside a tin of flour, a small cloth pouch of sugar, a few thick potatoes, and on top, wrapped in wax paper, 2 slices of warm cornbread. There was no note. Just silence. But she knew who it was. She took the bundle inside, placed it gently on the counter. Levi would return before noon, and if he saw it, he'd know. And if he knew, he'd make her pay. So she hid the bread in the lining of the pantry, tucked the sugar into an old coffee tin, and buried the potatoes at the bottom of the root cellar. She didn't eat them. Not yet. Just knowing they were there was enough, like a candle flickering in the dark. She could go back to it when things grew too cold. The next day, there was nothing on the porch. The day after, another bundle. This time, dried apples and a square of jerky. No signature, no tracks, just a silent gift that said, "I see you." On the 4th day, there was no food. Only a single scrap of paper, folded neatly and tucked under a stone. "You are not invisible." Mabel sat on the porch until her legs went numb. She wasn't used to kindness, not without expectation, not without strings. When Levi came home that evening, she pretended not to flinch when his boots hit the floorboards. He muttered something about the sheriff sniffing around town, asking about overdue debts. She barely heard him. Her mind was still on the note, on those 4 words. She tucked it into the lining of her apron and wore it like armor. That night he tried to pull her clothes. She let him because that was safer. She knew how to shape herself into something he wouldn't hit. Afterward, she turned her face to the wall and whispered again, "I pretend to be asleep when he drinks." It became a prayer, a truth, a map of her every movement. And still Silas came. Not in broad daylight, never with words, only offerings, a patch sewn into the hem of her coat, a clean pair of wool socks tucked behind the well, a bar of soap that smelled faintly of lavender. She never caught him in the act. That was the magic of it. He left the gifts like someone laying flowers on a grave. Then came the morning, when the bruises were too much to hide. It hadn't been the worst beating. No broken ribs, no blood, just fury, just a cracked lip and a blackened eye, enough to swell her face and close one lid, enough to force her to eat slowly, carefully. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in years. But that morning Silas knocked. Not once, twice, softly, like a man who didn't expect an answer. Mabel opened the door anyway. He didn't flinch when he saw her face. Didn't lower his eyes or gasp or shake his head. He looked at her and she looked back, one eye open, one nearly shut, a storm brewing in her throat but no words coming out. "I was riding by," he said gently. She stepped aside. He didn't come in. She didn't invite him. But for a long moment they stood there, not saying a word, just standing, as if the air between them held all the things that couldn't be said. Then, without breaking his gaze, he said, "It's not your fault," and turned to leave. The tears came after he left, not many, just a few, enough to remind her she was still capable. That night when Levi came home, he smelled the difference. Mabel had washed the blood from her lip, brushed her hair, stood straighter. "You been out?" "No." "Someone come by?" "No." He stared at her, eyes narrowing. "You're different." She said nothing. He took a step forward. Another. She didn't retreat. "I know what you're doing," he hissed. "I know you think you can leave, think someone's gonna save you, think that rancher's got it in him, but you're wrong." She didn't blink. He grabbed her wrist. But she didn't cry. He shoved her back hard. She hit the edge of the table, gasped. "You belong to me," he growled. The next morning she wrote a letter. Not to the sheriff, not to her family, they'd stopped answering long ago. She wrote it to Silas, folded it twice, didn't sign it. "I don't know if I can leave, but if I try I might need help." She tucked it beneath the wooden slat at the far edge of the barn, where the hay was thin and the wind sometimes howled through. She didn't expect him to find it. But he did. 2 days later, a new note appeared. This one was longer. "There's a key under the trough at my fence line. Come when you're ready. I don't care if it's night or day. If you knock, I'll open the door." She read it 3 times before folding it into the lining of her dress. Then she waited. 3 days. 4. Levi grew restless, crueler. He began asking questions again, pressed harder, stalked her from room to room, eyes full of suspicion and madness. Then one evening it happened. The storm broke. He came home earlier than expected, found her outside, tending to the chickens. "I told you not to go near that fence," he spat. "I didn't," she said quickly. "You're lying." He grabbed her arm. "I saw the tracks, I ain't stupid." She tried to pull away. He hit her. This time she hit the ground. Mouth split open, dirt in her teeth, pain exploding down her side. And that night, for the first time, she did not whisper. She got up. She waited until the house fell quiet. Then she packed nothing. Took no food. No clothes. Just her shoes and the note from Silas. She stepped barefoot across the frost-lined floor, opened the door without a sound, slipped into the cold. The wind howled as she walked, not fast, not yet, just steady, toward the fence line, toward the place where the trough sat half frozen. She dropped to her knees, reached under. The key was there. She didn't cry, not until she saw the cabin light, glowing gold like a promise. She knocked once, twice. The door opened. Silas stood there. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't reach for her. He just stepped aside. And Mabel Wynne crossed the threshold without looking back. Silas didn't say a word for the first hour. He didn't offer a chair, or tea, or warmth. He didn't try to console her, or ask what she'd done, or how bad the bruises were this time. He simply closed the door behind her with a gentleness she hadn't known in years, and stood watch as she walked slow circles around the cabin like an animal learning to breathe in a new cage. There was only one room, a stove in the corner casting a low, humming heat, a cot in the far end with 2 wool blankets folded neatly, a table made of thick oak and 2 chairs beside it, and silence, deep, respectful silence. Mabel didn't sit, not yet. Her hands shook too much. She gripped the edge of the table instead, knuckles white. She could still feel Levi's grip on her arm, his voice in her ear, slurring threats like prayers. The ghosts of the past hour hadn't left her skin yet. "I'm not staying," she said finally. Her voice was too small, hoarse. Silas didn't look up from where he was unbuttoning his coat. "I didn't ask you to. I just needed a place to. I didn't know where else to. You're safe here." It was 3 words, but it collapsed something inside her. She sank into the chair behind her before her knees gave out completely. The table was warm beneath her palms, the wood worn smooth with time. She looked at his hands as he moved about the cabin, careful not to make noise. He poured a tin mug of water and set it in front of her, then turned to tend the fire. Those hands, rough, calloused, looked like they'd known work all their life. But not violence. There was a steadiness to him, the kind men like Levi could never counterfeit. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "You don't have to decide tonight. I can't go back." He nodded once slowly, "Then don't." "But I can't stay either. He'll come." "Yes. He'll look for me, ask around, maybe hurt someone." Silas looked up. "Let him. You don't understand. He's not a man who walks away. I've dealt with men like him." She looked at him then, really looked. There was a weight behind his eyes, something unspoken, the kind of pain that knows its way around silence. Maybe that's why he never pressed her for answers. Maybe he already knew what kind of story hers was. She sipped the water, lips raw. It hurt. Everything hurt. But something in her chest was starting to loosen, like a knot slowly, slowly unraveling. That night she slept in the cot. Silas rolled out a blanket beside the stove and slept on the floor without protest or discussion. When the fire died down, she thought he was asleep, but he was. She could tell by the rhythm of his breathing, the stillness. He was keeping watch. The first night passed without dreams. But the next morning, as the sun painted pale gold across the snow-packed dirt, reality came knocking again. In her mind, she could already see Levi raving, smashing dishes, riding out to neighbors with that rage in his mouth. A man like that didn't care about laws. He cared about control. And Mabel had just shattered the last piece he thought he held. She sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the blanket. "He'll find me." "Not here," Silas said from the stove. "You don't know that." "I do." "How?" He turned, placed a pan of oats on the fire. "Because I've hidden folks before." That made her pause. "Who?" Silas stirred slow. "Doesn't matter. What matters is they're still breathing." She stared at him. "Why would you do that? Why risk it?" "Because someone did it for me once." The room was quiet again. Later they ate in near silence, the only sounds the clink of spoons and the occasional shift of wind against the walls. Outside, the trees groaned under frost. No birds, no footsteps, no threats, but the dread inside her hadn't thawed. She helped clean. It felt strange. Her hands weren't bleeding or bandaged, so work wasn't pain, just motion. Her wrists still bore the faded yellow of bruises, but her fingers moved freely. She hadn't felt that in years. She scrubbed dishes that didn't belong to her, swept a floor she'd never walked before yesterday, and still felt more at home than she ever had in that big, empty farmhouse Levi had claimed. On the third day, Silas went to town. "I'll be gone a few hours," he told her. "Keep the door locked. Don't open for anyone." She nodded, even if. He left her with wood for the fire, a tin of food, and a rifle propped beside the door. It wasn't until she was alone again that the silence felt dangerous. She paced, sat, stared out the window. And just before noon she saw him. Not Silas. Not Levi. A rider. Far off at the ridge, staring, motionless. She dropped to the floor before the figure could spot her, crawled to the other side of the cabin, heart thudding loud enough she swore it echoed. But he didn't come closer. Just turned and rode off. She waited an hour before standing again. Silas returned in the late afternoon. She told him about the rider. He said nothing, just nodded, checked the rifle, and placed another beside it. "Next time," he said softly, "don't freeze, just aim." She didn't argue. She didn't say she was scared because that was obvious. She didn't say she'd never held a gun before, because something in her gut told her that wouldn't be true for much longer. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat beside the stove, watching the flames whisper to the dark. Her thoughts wouldn't rest. They circled like wolves. What if Levi found the cabin? What if he brought others? What if Silas got hurt? What if she had to run again? Around midnight, Silas stirred on the floor. "You all right?" he asked. She didn't answer for a long moment. "Then why me?" He opened his eyes, squinting against the glow. "What do you mean?" "Why bother helping me? I'm no one. I'm just a woman who made a bad choice and stayed too long." He sat up, rubbed his hands together. "You think that's all you are?" She swallowed. "Isn't it?" "No," he looked at her, really looked. "You're someone who survived." "Barely. But still." A log popped in the fire. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "My mama used to say there's a kind of woman God watches closely. The ones who suffer quiet but don't quit. She said they carry more heaven in their bones than the rest of us. I used to think that was just something she said to feel better." Silas didn't speak. But sometimes I think maybe she was right. They sat in silence a long while. And then quietly he said, "My wife was like that." She turned to him, startled. "I didn't know you." "I don't talk about her." "What happened?" He stared into the fire, jaw tight. "She was good, too good for me. Cancer took her before the war could. I went off anyway, came back to nothing. So I started building what I could, helping who I could. Figured if I couldn't save her, maybe I could still do some good." She whispered, "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be. She's the reason I knew what to do when I saw you." Something deep in Mabel softened. For the first time in years, someone saw her and didn't flinch, didn't pity, just stood beside her and stayed. In the morning they rode out together. Just a short ride, he said, to stretch her legs, to show her the land around the cabin. She didn't realize until they were halfway up the trail that he was showing her escape routes, points of cover, where to run, where to hide, how to signal from the ridge. He didn't say it outright, but she understood. She wasn't just hiding anymore. She was preparing. And when they returned to the cabin that afternoon, they found the door ajar. The fire was out. The chairs overturned. And a single nail, bent and rusted, lay on the floor like a whisper. Silas stepped in first. rifle raised. Mabel's breath caught. He motioned for her to stay behind. And then he knelt beside the doorframe, ran his finger along a carving etched deep into the wood. A symbol. 3 lines. Jagged. Angry. It meant something. He looked at her, face pale. Levi. She shook her head. No, he said, this was Levi. Then who? He looked at the mark again, eyes narrowing. Someone worse. Silas shut the door with a deliberate slowness, as though slamming it might trigger something unseen. Mabel stood in the center of the cabin, staring at the jagged mark on the doorframe. 3 carved lines. They didn't match Levi's hand. His rage had always been clumsy, blunt, smashing windows, slapping tableware to the floor, throwing punches without direction. This symbol was surgical, measured. It had meaning, and that chilled her more than any broken chair or missing firewood. Silas didn't speak until he'd walked the perimeter of the cabin, checking for other signs, footprints, disturbed brush, snapped twigs. He found none. Could have come from the north, he muttered, mostly to himself. Riders can cut through the ravine. Not likely, but not impossible. Who is it? Mabel asked again, her voice dry. He didn't answer at first. Instead, he crouched near the stove, rubbing a small dark spot on the floor. It wasn't blood. It was ash, still warm. They lit the fire, he said. Sat here for a while, ate something, probably knew we weren't far. And they left a mark. They left a message. He stood. Then finally, he met her eyes. I need to tell you something, he said, but you need to be calm, and you need to believe me when I say we're not helpless. Mabel nodded slow. Silas took a long breath. That symbol, it doesn't belong to Levi. It belongs to a man named Grant Halberd. The name meant nothing to her. He runs a crew, Silas continued. Not outlaws in the usual sense. They don't steal cattle or rob banks. They handle people, people like Levi who want problems to disappear, quietly. She staggered back a step as if slapped. You're saying he hired? Not yet, but it's possible Levi's reached out. Grant leaves that mark before he starts something. It's a threat, a courtesy before violence. Her mind reeled. I thought Levi was the worst of it. I thought once I got away. He's not a man who lets go, Silas said flatly. And if he has money and pride, he'll want to fix what you did. I ran. You defied him. Mabel looked toward the door, but not through it. Through time. Through memory. Through the long nights of pretending to be asleep while Levi drank himself silent, pressing her ear to the pillow so she wouldn't hear what he muttered. So she wouldn't have to feel the weight of his resentment pressing against her ribs like a second skin. And now it wasn't just Levi chasing her. It was a man who specialized in removal. How do we fight that? She whispered. You and me, a cabin and a couple rifles. We don't fight him, Silas said. Not here, not like this. He crossed to the table and reached beneath it, pulled out a leather roll, worn and tied tight. When he unwrapped it, Mabel saw knives. 10 of them, each a different shape, old but polished, balanced. Silas laid them out like they were pieces of a ritual. Then he added a map. We don't wait, he said. We move today. I know where he camps. If we're quick, we can see what he's planning. Maybe even catch him before he gets the rest of his crew. You want to go to him. I want to see what he's planning. But what if he sees you? He won't. There was no bravado in Silas's voice, just fact, like he'd done this before, like sneaking into the mouth of danger was just another morning chore. Mabel didn't know what life he'd led before this cabin, but it was clear now, Silas hadn't just hidden people. He'd hunted the ones who came after them. She watched as he packed 2 small bags, one for her, one for him. He moved with efficiency, not urgency. He even set a small kettle on the stove as they readied, like they had time to sip tea before walking into the storm. "You're not coming all the way," he said, slinging the rifle over his back. "We'll ride till dusk, then you wait. I go alone." She shook her head. "You can't face this alone." "Mabel." "No, I won't hide again while someone else takes the hit for me." He looked at her a long moment, then handed her one of the knives. It felt heavier than it looked. They rode out within the hour, horses cutting through the frostbitten trail. Silas led without speaking, head down, eyes scanning every tree and dip in the land. The world around them narrowed to hoofbeats and breath. Mabel hadn't ridden this far in years, but something in her had shifted. She no longer felt like a passenger in her own life. At dusk, they reached a ridge overlooking a shallow basin, where a thin trail of smoke coiled into the sky. Silas motioned for her to stop. "There," he said, "that's his fire." She dismounted quietly, heart hammering. From the ridge they could just make out the outline of a man sitting by the flames, alone, reading something, or cleaning something. It was too far to tell. "Wait here," Silas said. "No, I'm not asking. Neither am I." He started to argue, then stopped, looked at her face. Something in it made him pause. "She's gone," she said softly. "The woman who used to flinch. I buried her when I walked through your door." They moved down the ridge together. Step by step the basin opened. The fire grew closer. The figure by it remained still, back turned. Then, a crack behind them. Both spun. Another man stepped from the trees, not Grant, but someone younger. Faster. He lunged at Silas before either of them could speak. Silas dodged the blade, but the man was fast, too fast. They grappled. The knife skidded from Silas's hand. Mabel grabbed a branch from the ground, swung, missed. The stranger slammed Silas to the ground, raised his knife. And then Mabel was on him. She didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She drove her own blade into the man's side. He gasped, collapsed. Silas pushed him off, panting. Mabel stood still, trembling, blood on her hands. She'd never killed anything before. Not even a rabbit. Now, he touched her arm gently. "You saved my life. I killed him. You defended yourself." But her breath wouldn't come. "I didn't know I could," she whispered. "You had to." Silas checked the man's coat. No mark, no letter, but a coin in his pocket, a silver medallion etched with 3 jagged lines. He held it up. Grant sent him ahead. Then from the fire below, the man who'd been sitting finally stood, turned, and looked up. Grant Halberd. He smiled and whistled. 4 more men stepped from the trees. Mabel and Silas froze. "We run," he said. They fled through the trees, no time for careful paths or soft steps. The forest blurred. Branches tore at their coats. Hooves followed fast and hard. "They're closing in. Over here." Silas yanked her down a steep slope. Mud slid beneath their boots, but they didn't fall, didn't stop. At the bottom, a creek carved a narrow path between boulders. "Through the water," he said. "It'll throw off the trail." They ran waist-deep, breathless. The sounds behind them dulled. But when they climbed out again, soaked, shivering, it was only moments before they heard the whistle again. Grant's signal. He knew they were close, and he was enjoying the chase. Mabel doubled over, coughing. "I can't." "Yes, you can. I can't outrun him." "We're not outrunning, we're trapping." "What?" He scanned the area, found an old hunter's den, a small rock crevice barely wide enough for 2 people. He pushed her inside, then followed. The space was cold and black, but dry. "We wait," he whispered, "then we fight." She shook, not from fear, from adrenaline. "I'm not ready." "You are." Outside, footsteps slowed. Voices murmured. They came through here. Tracks end at the water. Spread out. Silas held his breath. Then, a pause. Closer. Boots. Silas gripped his knife. The crevice opening filled with shadow. A man's face appeared. And for the second time in 24 hours, Mabel didn't hesitate. She lunged. Her blade found flesh. He screamed, staggered back. Silas finished him. Then silence. Again. This time no more whistles. Just wind. Just breath. Just two souls clinging to life. They waited another hour before emerging. The bodies were gone. But so was the fire. Grant had pulled back. Or gone to regroup. Either way, this wasn't over. But Mabel had blood on her hands now. And not even shame could wash it off. She didn't want to be a killer. But she wouldn't be prey. Not anymore. They rode back in silence. When the cabin came into view, she stopped her horse and looked at the land. This is the only place I've ever felt safe, she said. We'll keep it safe, Silas replied. How? He didn't smile. Didn't blink. We make them afraid. Morning bled into the earth slow and colorless, the kind of gray light that made even peace feel temporary. Silas sat on the porch sharpening his blades, one by one, while Mabel scrubbed the blood from her coat by the creek, her hands trembling beneath the surface. The water stung, clear and biting, not warm enough to comfort, not cold enough to numb. She didn't speak while she worked. She just watched the water swirl red around her fingers, then fade, then return to clear again like it hadn't held violence just moments before. But nothing stayed gone. Blood had memory and hers had changed. When she stood, her knees ached. Silas looked up as she approached. He'd cleaned the porch since sunrise, swept it down, repaired a broken hinge, even straightened the chairs like this was still a home worth pretending for. But his eyes didn't carry the look of a man living ordinary hours anymore. He held up a sheet of paper, folded into fourths. This came with the coin, found it in the man's vest. Mabel took it with stiff fingers. The handwriting was neat, too neat. As if the man who wrote it didn't believe in rushing death. 2 targets confirmed. 1 female, 1 male, female priority. Orders remain intact. No noise, no fire, no trace. Deliver remains to Levi upon completion. Advance payment received. Balance upon delivery. There was no name, no signature. But the date was yesterday. Mabel's lips went dry. He really meant to kill me. Silas said nothing. She folded the paper again and handed it back, like she couldn't bear to touch it longer than necessary. I've spent years believing I was overreacting, she whispered. That maybe it wasn't so bad, that if I just kept quiet, kept small, Levi wouldn't break. Silas nodded once. That's what men like him depend on. Her voice broke then, just for a second. He paid someone to end me. And now we end this. She looked at him, really looked, and saw it for the first time. Silas wasn't just a protector. He was something else. Something older. Something that didn't run. He unfolded a larger map from the satchel near his feet and laid it across the porch. Grant operates like a fox, moves in loops, has 4 known camps spread in a ring. If we track where he was last night and follow the pattern, he's likely to hit the next camp by tonight. You're saying we go there first? No, I'm saying we cut him off before he makes it. Won't he expect that? Maybe. Mabel knelt beside the map. Her fingers hovered over the circled points. What if he already has more men? He does. What if this is too big? Silas met her gaze. Then we fight small, we find the edge, we make him bleed for every inch. She didn't nod. didn't agree. But she didn't argue either. They packed light again, left a note at the cabin just in case, not a farewell, a marker, the kind of message meant for whoever came after. Mabel wrote it. We were here, we mattered, we tried. They set out before noon. The land changed beneath them, grew rougher, more unpredictable. Every ravine could hold an ambush. Every gust of wind might carry a whisper too close. But they didn't slow, didn't turn back. By dusk, they reached a narrow canyon with smoke rising soft from below. Silas raised a hand. They're here. Mabel dismounted quietly. She felt the tremor in her thighs from the ride but willed it still. This wasn't the time to feel tired. This was the time to finish something. They crept to the edge. Below, 3 men sat by a low fire. One was cleaning a gun. One was asleep. The third, tall, broad-shouldered, paced like a caged thing. Grant. He travels light, Mabel whispered. He sends others to do his bleeding, Silas replied. They waited until the pacing slowed. Until Grant wandered out of earshot. Then, Silas moved. Vast. Mabel followed. The sleeping man never woke. The one cleaning his gun looked up too late. Then it was just Grant, standing across the fire, watching them, unarmed, unbothered. You must be the girl, he said softly. Mabel didn't answer. He looked at her like he was reading something he'd seen before. Not fear, he didn't expect fear, he expected desperation, panic. What he found instead was resolve. I don't kill for pleasure, he said. I do it for payment, clean business, but you made it messy. You showed up at our door, Mabel said. You made it war. War. He smiled. No, war requires equal ground. This isn't that. He whistled. Again. Silas tensed. But no one came. Grant frowned. He whistled again. Nothing. Silas stepped forward. Your men won't come. We circled back before we left. Cut their saddles, spoiled their water. They won't ride tonight. You think you've won. No, Silas said, but you've lost. Then it happened fast. Grant lunged, not at Mabel, not at Silas, but at the fire. Kicked it wide. Ash burst into the air, blinding. He vanished behind smoke. Silas ran forward. Mabel flanked. But Grant was already gone. They followed tracks, crushed weeds, bent twigs through the brush. Down a slope. Toward the river. And then he was there again, crouched by the bank. Holding something. A knife. No. A piece of paper. He dropped it. Then dove into the water. Gone. Silas stopped at the edge. Mabel picked up the paper. It was soaked. Barely legible. But the words chilled her more than the chase. If I die, she dies. You'll never stop all of us. Levi has others. Silas stepped into the water, but Mabel stopped him. No, let him run. We can't. He said Levi has others. He looked at her. The ache in his jaw deepened. He nodded once. They returned to the camp, burned what was left, took nothing, left nothing. By dawn they were riding back. The wind had turned, the air was different, lighter, not safer but thinner, like something dense had passed. When they reached the cabin, it was still standing. But the door was ajar. Mabel drew her gun. Silas held his blade low. They stepped in. And froze. The room was empty. No signs of struggle. No blood. But the map they'd left was gone. And on the table, a fresh mark carved into the wood. 3 jagged lines. Below it, a single word burned in with the tip of a blade. Soon. Mabel backed away. Silas crossed himself. They weren't done. Levi had opened another door, and whoever stood behind it had a longer reach. They didn't sleep that night, didn't speak, just sat by the fire and sharpened what they could. Knives, resolve, faith. And when morning came again, Mabel didn't weep. She dressed, strapped her blade to her side, and whispered only one word before stepping outside. Ready. The storm arrived without warning. Not one made of rain or thunder, but the quiet kind, the kind that begins with stillness so complete it feels like a held breath from heaven. By the time Mabel stepped off the porch, she felt it in her teeth. That tension, that waiting, and in her chest the ache of knowing something was about to come loose. She didn't speak it aloud, but Silas must have felt it too. He loaded the horses with practiced hands, slower than usual, quieter. They both knew now this was no longer about escaping Levi. This was about ending him. Not just for her, for whoever came next. They rode hard west, following a trail Mabel knew from memory, though it had grown cold from disuse. Past the orchard where old man Hauser once hung his boots on a tree and died standing. Past the charred wreck of a church Levi had blamed on lightning, though everyone in town knew it wasn't the sky that set holy things on fire. And past the ravine where 3 women vanished 5 winters ago, and Levi swore they'd wandered off drunk. Too many ghosts walked this land. Too many of them wore his name. He never stayed anywhere long, Mabel said after their second hour in the saddle, but he had one place he kept returning to. A mine shaft west of Rockroot. Said it was his father's land, but I never saw a deed. Only chains and barrels. Barrels. She nodded. Of what I never asked, but he kept them locked and the locks were rusted shut. One time I heard something in one of them, scratching, like a rat, but slower. Silas's face turned grim. And you stayed. I was 17. He wasn't always like what you saw. He was slower back then. The kind that makes you think it's your fault when the wind shifts. They rode on. By dusk the mine appeared, a jagged scar in the side of a forgotten hill. The trees around it were long dead, not from axe or fire but something older, something buried. The horses wouldn't go further. They tied them beneath the ridge and climbed the last stretch on foot. Mabel moved first. She remembered the slope, the loose shale that threatened ankles, the path Levi always warned her not to walk, but it was still there, still dangerous, like him. They reached the entrance. The wooden supports groaned in the wind, half-eaten by rot but still standing. Above it, a rusted bell hung, tied to an old string Levi claimed was for signaling emergencies. Mabel always thought it was meant for something else. She stepped inside. It smelled like soil and something sweet gone wrong. Rotting fruit, maybe, or meat left too long in the sun. Silas lit a lantern and followed. The shaft narrowed fast, walls close, ceiling lower, no light but what they brought. After 30 paces, they reached the room. And the barrels. 6 of them. Each bound with iron bands, sealed with pitch. Silas approached the closest and pressed his ear to the wood. Silence. Then tap. 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 He recoiled. That's not a rat. No, Mabel whispered. That's what I heard. They didn't touch them. They searched the rest of the mine instead. In the corner, beneath a collapsed beam, they found the ledger. Leather-bound, water-stained, but intact. Inside, names. Dozens. Maybe more. Each followed by a code. F for female. M for male. C child. Then another set of marks. X presumed dead. D delivered. O outstanding. Silas flipped through it until he reached a name that hadn't been updated yet. Mabel. O, he read aloud, outstanding. She stared at it, her hands shook. Not from fear. from fury. This was never about me leaving, she said. It was about not being finished. He sees people like business, Silas said. Transactions, and you interrupted one. Mabel tore the page out, folded it, kept it. Then they burned the ledger. Poured lamp oil across the barrels too, though Silas hesitated. What if there's someone inside? He asked. She looked at him, jaw tight. Then God forgive me, but I can't risk what happens if Levi uses them again. He nodded, lit the match, turned his back, and didn't watch them burn. Outside, the sky had gone purple, like bruised skin. They sat on a fallen log as the mine burned behind them. No words, just flame. But Mabel's peace didn't last, because in the silence a new sound echoed. Hoofbeats. Not one, not two, a dozen. They both rose. Down the hill came riders, dark figures against the dying light, all moving in perfect rhythm like one machine. At their front a banner. Not a flag, just a length of torn fabric, with Levi's initials painted in ash. LS. Mabel stepped forward. No more running, she said. No more. They readied their weapons. Silas with his rifle, Mabel with her revolver. The riders stopped just out of range. One dismounted. Tall, broad hat low. Not Levi, but something close. The man stepped forward and unrolled a scroll. By order of Levi Sturgis, he said, you are trespassing on his land and interfering in private matters. This is your one warning. Mabel laughed once, bitter, private. The woman is his wife. Not anymore. The man lowered the scroll. Then you'll die like a stranger. He turned, raised a hand, and the riders advanced. Silas didn't wait. He fired the first shot, dropped the front horse. The rest scattered but not far. Gunfire lit the hill like lightning. Mabel ducked behind the log, returned fire. Her hand burned from the recoil, her lungs stung from smoke, but she didn't stop. This was her reckoning. This was her storm. They hit 3 riders, maybe 4. But they kept coming. Silas took a graze to the shoulder, didn't flinch, reloaded. Mabel ran out of bullets, dropped to her knees, scrambled for another round. And then, a scream. One of the riders fell, hands clawing at his neck. Then another, and another. Shapes moved through the trees. Vast, silent, arrows, knives, shadows. It wasn't just her and Silas anymore. The town had come. The real town. The forgotten ones. Women who'd once vanished. Men who'd kept quiet. Children grown now, with memories and scars. They came in silence. With fury. With justice. The riders broke. Fled. Some never made it off the hill. The leader fell last, gutted clean by a woman with braids and a broken tooth, who whispered Mabel's name like a prayer. And then it was over. Just smoke. Breath. Ash. Mabel stood slowly. Looked around. Saw faces she hadn't seen in years. Why now, she asked. An old woman stepped forward. Because you stayed. That night they didn't sleep. They buried the bodies, marked the graves. And when dawn came, Mabel stood at the edge of the ridge and watched the sun rise over the blackened mine. I'm not done, she said softly. Silas came to stand beside her. We know. She turned to the crowd, what was left of it, 20 maybe, some wounded, some just tired. I'm going to finish him, Levi. No one spoke. But no one left. They understood. Some wars don't end with one battle. They end when the name is buried, when the echoes are gone, when no one else has to pretend to be asleep to survive the night. The fire had cooled by morning, but the land around it hadn't. The air still held the weight of the night before, of gunpowder, of sweat, of a silence that knew too much. The ridge stood scarred. Smoke still curled where the mine had been. The barrels were gone, melted down to slag and ash. The ledger was dust, but Mabel Wren stood taller than she ever had, and for once the ground beneath her didn't feel like it would give out if she breathed too hard. Silas sat nearby, shoulder bandaged, chewing quietly on dried jerky, watching her without speaking. He hadn't said much since dawn, and she was grateful for it. Sometimes silence was its own kind of mercy. Below the ridge, the survivors made camp. Makeshift tents, coffee pots black with soot, quiet voices that didn't ask what came next because deep down they all knew. This wasn't a retreat. It was a staging ground. They weren't running from Levi anymore. They were going to him. Mabel finished tying her hair back, then tightened the straps on her saddle. Her hands no longer trembled like they used to. Her voice didn't break when she spoke Silas's name. He's not far, he'll have run south. There's a ranch 2 valleys down. I remember the name, Winterlow. It's isolated, protected. He used to say it was the only place a man could start over right. Silas stood slow and steady. Then that's where we end him. She nodded, then paused, eyes scanning the trees. And not just for me, not anymore. From the edge of camp, a woman stepped forward. Same one who had thrown the knife the night before, braided hair, sharp jaw, eyes like thawing ice. I'm riding with you, she said. Name's Ruth. Mabel blinked. Ruth, from the glass house. The woman gave a dry nod. I was his before you, thought I was his last, guess we were both wrong. Another man stepped up. He bought my father's land for half its worth, said he'd help us build. He took the deed and burned our tools. We lived under a tarp for 3 winters. He called it charity. Then a third, a girl no older than 16. He was my uncle. He said if I told, I'd go where Mama went. Mabel's jaw clenched, her stomach turned. She didn't ask where Mama went. She just nodded. All right, she said, then we ride together. That morning, they formed a line of 10. Not an army, just a threadbare group with calloused hands and hearts too heavy to keep silent any longer. But Levi didn't need an army to fall. He just needed the truth to reach his doorstep. The trail to Winterlow was narrow and mean. Snakes crossed their path more than once. Coyotes howled through the woods even in daylight. The sun felt hotter here, like even the land was trying to strip them of their will. But no one turned back. They reached the outskirts by nightfall. Winterlow wasn't a ranch anymore. It was a fortress. A wall of timber 10 feet tall, guard towers, oil lamps flickering along the perimeter. Silas whistled low under his breath. He's scared, he said. Mabel smiled. Good. They waited until the moon climbed high, then circled north along the tree line, finding a low point where the wall gave way to thorned brush. Ruth produced a blade and cut a path. Inside, the land was quiet, too quiet. No dogs. No voices. Just lamps. And shadows. They moved in pairs, Mabel and Silas leading, Ruth and the others just behind. At the center of Winterlow stood a large house, 2 stories high, white paint peeling like dead skin. Curtains drawn tight. No music. No warmth. Just the hollow hush of something waiting to be dealt with. Mabel stopped 20 paces from the porch. This is mine, she said. Silas put a hand on her arm. You don't have to. I do. He let her go. She walked alone to the front steps. Didn't knock. Just turned the handle. It opened with a creak like the throat of an old god. Inside, it smelled of vinegar, paper, and something sour beneath it. A candle burned low on the entry table. The same kind Levi used to say was, "For the Lord's sake." But Mabel had long since learned that people who feared God for real didn't have to burn candles to prove it. She stepped into the hallway, boots silent on the floor. The walls were lined with photographs, family portraits, but none of them showed faces. All the heads were scratched out, blurred, or simply turned away. She reached the parlor. He was waiting. Levi Sturgis sat in a leather chair, legs crossed, Bible in his lap. But he wasn't reading it. He was watching the door. Like he'd known she was coming. "Mabel," he said, soft, almost tender, "you came home." She didn't answer. She stepped further in, revolver in hand. His eyes flicked to it, then back to her face. "You're not going to shoot me," he said. "You're not built for killing." She tilted her head. "I used to think that too," she said, "but you've taught me things I never wanted to learn." He closed the book, laid it on the table, stood. She kept the gun level. "I won't lie," he said, stepping closer. "I missed you." "Don't. You had your rebellion, I let you run wild. But this is nonsense, Mabel. You and that rancher, those fools outside. Do you really think you've built something stronger than me?" "No," she said, "I didn't build it." "Then what?" "They came on their own, because you left ruin wherever you went." He reached out slow, like she was a spooked horse. "I forgave you, Mabel, even after the lies, after the night you ran. I told the sheriff you weren't well, that I still loved you. You don't know what love is." He moved too fast. Tried to grab the gun. She pulled the trigger. The bullet tore through his shoulder. He screamed short and sharp and dropped to one knee. Blood soaked his shirt. But he laughed. "Even in pain." "You think that's enough," he wheezed. "You think you can break a man like me with pain." She stepped closer. "Pain didn't break you, Levi," she said. "The truth did." Behind her, the door opened. Silas entered first. Then Ruth. Then the others. All of them watching. All of them waiting. Levi saw them and something in him shifted. Not fear, something worse. Recognition. Like all the shadows he'd tried to forget had come home wearing faces. Ruth walked forward. "You remember me?" she asked. He stared. "You said I'd never be clean again," she said. Then drove a knee into his chest. He coughed blood. Another stepped forward. Then another. They didn't hurt him. Not more than they had to. But they stood. Surrounded him. Witnessed him. And that somehow, that was worse for him than bullets. "You're not going to kill me," he whispered. "You need me alive for proof." Mabel leaned down. "I don't need you for anything," she said. "I just needed to be believed." She stood, turned to the group. "Get him out." They tied him, took him from the house. Outside, the others in Winterlow, the guards, the staff, stood with their hands raised. Not one of them defended Levi. They'd seen what he'd done, heard the cries, felt the rot under their boots. The lies were gone. The truth was out. By morning, the sheriff rode in. Someone had sent a wire the night before. With the names. The ledger. The bodies in the mine. There'd be a trial. A long one. But Mabel didn't stay for it. She watched them drag Levi away in shackles, and when he turned to scream something at her, she didn't listen. She walked back to Silas. To the camp. To the others. They rode out before noon. Back toward the ridge. Back toward whatever came next. The past couldn't be buried. But it didn't have to be carried alone anymore. Mabel rode with her head high. Not because the pain was gone, but because it finally had somewhere to go. The ride home wasn't quiet, not really. The silence was just a different kind, no longer the kind that wrapped around a woman's throat to keep her compliant, or filled her chest with shame when the bruises darkened just out of sight. This silence was full of breathing, full of shared glances, hushed conversations by firelight, the occasional burst of laughter like a wound healing from the inside out. It was the kind that came after surviving. And Mabel Wren had survived. Levi was gone, locked in a cell 2 counties east under a marshal's watch, waiting on trial. Word had already started to ripple through the towns. A preacher's son turned tyrant, women once cowed now standing tall in courtrooms, journals brought forward, old bones unearthed from land meant for harvest. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was a reckoning. But Mabel didn't think about that much. Not anymore. That part was done. She rode beside Sila's, the steady rhythm of his horse keeping pace with hers. Neither spoke unless there was need. They didn't have to. Their silence wasn't hollow. It was the kind that had been earned, shaped from long nights, blood, and a choice to believe someone the world had ignored. The cabin was still standing. She half expected it to be burned down. Levi had always said that if he couldn't have something, he'd make sure no one else did. But the front porch was intact. The flowers she'd planted had gone wild, yellow and orange blooms spilling over the path. The door creaked just the same when she opened it. Inside, the table was still overturned, the window cracked from the last time he'd hit her hard enough to knock her into it. She stepped through the doorframe like crossing a river. Like that version of her was still crouched inside, holding her breath, eyes swollen, heart pacing. And she walked right through her. Didn't flinch. "I'll fix it up," Silas said quietly behind her. "No," Mabel said. "I want it to stay broken a little longer." He nodded. In the days that followed, the others came. Ruth stayed first, took the shed behind the cabin and cleaned it up, hammered new shingles into the roof and strung a row of horseshoes over the door. Said they brought her luck. Said if she ever had to leave again, she wanted to leave from a place where the wind didn't sound like a man's voice in the dark. Then came Miriam, the 16-year-old, her shoulders too small for the weight she'd carried. Mabel gave her the east bedroom and a warm meal. Miriam gave her silence and slowly, the pieces of her story, little by little like trading stones for bread. More women arrived as summer passed. Some stayed only a week. Some never left. They came from dust towns, off trains, from behind church pews, from back doors with busted hinges. They carried babies, bruises, names they didn't want to speak aloud, and Mabel welcomed everyone. The cabin became something more, not a home exactly, a place of pause, a sanctuary for the in-between. They called it the Crossing. It wasn't a ranch, not yet, but Silas taught them to ride, taught the younger ones how to hold a rifle. Ruth taught knife work. Miriam took to building, hammering posts into the ground, stringing fences where none had stood before. Mabel tended the garden, taught canning, read scripture at night if someone asked. Not for preaching, just for peace. The sheriff visited once, asking questions. He left with a broken lantern and a clear warning. No man rides onto this land without an invitation. And that was the last they saw of him. But they didn't need everyone. They had each other. And that was enough.